Hey, welcome back. Let's talk about more real estate law, just overall contracts. All right, so what happens when someone breaches contract? So, for example, let's just say I've made an offer for you, to you to buy your home for 200,000, but in the contract it says that I'm going to show up on July 15th, and then I don't show up on July 15th for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter. Technically, I'm in breach of sales contract. So there's lots of remedies for the non-defaulting party. And let's talk about it. It really depends on if it's the buyer or the seller as to what remedies really are available. But the most common one would be either specific performance or monetary damages. Now, if you're a seller, you could also settle for liquidated damages, which for most of the time it's just somebody's EMD, their earnest money deposit. So, if you want to go buy a home, you have to put a deposit down. And a seller could actually, if you're the buyer and you're in breach, the seller could settle for liquidated damages. Obviously, the buyer couldn't settle for their own deposit. They could settle for an amount, but it wouldn't be a deposit because the deposit came from the buyer. So they don't want to settle with their own money if the seller chooses to breach. All right, so let's get into specific performance. The way I remember specific performance is judge, make them do what they said they were going to do. So you take them to court and you say, Judge, they promised they'd show up on July 15th. They promised to buy my house. They promised to provide me $100,000, and they have failed to do so. Can you force them to do what they said they were going to do? It's amazing nowadays. I'm always in shock at how many people don't keep their promises. They'll make a promise to purchase. Now, rightfully so, there's some times where you have situations where it makes sense to not purchase the home, and that's why you have contingencies. But a contingency says, within 7 days I'll do my home inspection. So if you do it in 15 days and just change your mind that you don't want it anymore, you've already missed your contractual contingency timeframes. So again, when you make a promise, you're supposed to stick with the promise. Everyone has to stick with the promise. But, unfortunately, a lot of people just don't for some reason, oh, never mind, I want to take the chandelier. Well, you can't take the chandelier now. You've already agreed to give it to them. But this is just how people work overall, so you're just going to have to learn how to handle these type of situations. Our goal as real estate professionals is to stay out of court. And honestly, I feel that that's what real estate training is for. What we're going through this video, we're really try to help keep you out of jail and try to help keep you out of court. Now, the practice overall, you're going to have to learn for your specific area, and that really you learn after you get your real estate license from your broker. Your broker is the one that is supposed to be training you and teaching you the actual practice and what to do and what not to do, how to generate your business, how to run a business effectively. So we've got classes for those as well if anybody needs those, but for right now, you got to pass your license, pass the test and get your license first. So let's handle that first. Again, back to specific performance. Judge, make them do what they said they were going to do. So if I said I was going to buy your home and I don't, you could sue me for specific performance and say, Judge, she said she was going to buy the house, force her to buy the house. And the judge could force me to proceed with the purchase. Okay, the other alternative would be, imagine this scenario. Let's just say that you decided you wanted to buy a home for $300,000, and we've seen this many times. So you want to buy the home for $300,000, and then the seller agrees, and you have a ratified contract. Your settlement has taken about 60 days, and the market has picked up tremendously. I've been down that road too many times, where suddenly the homes in the neighborhood are all selling for $360,000. Seller catches wind of this and says, hey, I don't want to sell anymore because I could have made $60,000 more. You're getting a steal of a deal, buyer, and forget you. I don't want to sell anymore. And they don't show up. Well, if that's the case, then what ends up happening is the seller would then be in default, and the buyer can then sue for monetary damages. So what ends up happening is then they would go to the judge and say, Judge, nope, they don't have to sell me the home anymore, but they do have to sell me the $60,000 because what ended up happening, they do have to pay me the $60,000 because what ended up happening is when I wasn't able to buy their home, I had to go buy another home in the neighborhood, and guess what? It cost me $60,000 more. Same home, same comparables, should have cost me the same, but because of the 2-month delay, you, Mr. Seller, have cost me $60,000. And that's not my fault, that's your fault. So really, did the seller win out? No. The seller is going to end up having to pay the difference in the end anyway, so they really didn't gain anything. They just hurt themselves. But, greed is it's an evil thing. Greed is a very bad thing, and a lot of times people fall victim to it. So again, monetary damages are, you have cost me money, and now you're going to have to pay for it. Judge, make them pay for the cost that I've incurred because of them. Not, fulfilling their promise, not performing. Okay? So again, you have two choices: specific performance. Judge, make them buy, or monetary damages. Judge, they didn't buy, make them pay the difference as to what, the costs are. There's no punitive damages, pain and suffering. We're not going to go through those. And you can't do both. You can't say, make them buy and give me my $60,000. You can't do that. It's one or the other. So that's important. So when you choose to sue someone, you're going to choose which one you want to do. Now, if you choose specific performance, seller can't sell. This is a big one that comes up in our office all the time. Well, no one has signed a release of contract. Can we move forward and sell the property? No. If the buyer still wants to buy it, they may sue you later for specific performance. Now, again, you need to talk to your attorney. I'm not an attorney. However, it's one of those types of situations we encounter all the time, and you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you've actually sold the property and then you're sued because the buyers really wanted the property. That causes title defects and, title disputes, and it could be a big messy problem. And that brings me over to release agreements. So some contracts are, you have, in order to release or rescind or walk away unharmed, you need both parties to agree. And sometimes we have that happen. About 6% of our sales contracts end up in a situation where buyer and seller agree they don't want to sell to each other, and they don't want to buy, they don't want to sell. Sometimes it's because the buyers discovered things and the seller's like, fine. Other times they just don't like each other mutually. Fine. Whatever the situation may be, as long as we can get them to agree on a release form, then you'll be absolutely fine, because we're walking away and we're agreeing not to sue each other. We're both agreeing to let each other go, and it's okay that you've broken your promise. I agree. You can break your promise. So it's a brand new agreement to not fulfill your promise. So that's important. Other than that, there's the impossibility defense. So I don't need you to give me permission not to sell to you when my house burned to the ground. If the house burned to the ground, unless I caused the fire, that may be a little different. However, for the most part, if my house, a tornado came by and knocked it all down, and if I'm under contract, I don't need your permission not to sell anymore, because it's impossible for me to. So it's an impossibility defense. So notice the difference between that. One, you have to get the mutual consent of all parties to walk away. The other one, you don't need mutual consent because there's an impossibility. Does that make sense? Now be very, very careful with that. Again, always advise your clients talk to an attorney. That's really what an attorney's job is, and it's not our job to do that. So please be careful not to cross the line in that case. And this is just designed to help you pass test questions, okay? Not the actual practice. All right, so what are some typical contract clauses that you may run across? Now, number one, I want to tell you a clause would be a condition, okay? So that's really big that you understand that. So, for example, the acceleration clause says so remember when we talked about a condition, it was if, when, unless provided. Those are the key words to look for. So the acceleration clause would say, if you have missed your payment, you violated one of the terms of your mortgage or deed of trust, then the entire balance becomes due and payable today. We're going to accelerate the payoff. You need to pay today. So you'll notice if you miss a payment ever, or if one of your clients misses a payment, the entire due balance becomes due right away. We've already talked about contingencies and how it's if, when, unless provided, but those are some clauses that you may find in a contract, so you need to be aware of that, because if they're there, we need to make sure that we're recognizing them. Are there contingencies built in as far as timelines that we need to be watching out for? Is it one that we agree to? Because remember, it's always optional. The seller can always take out a contingency if they don't agree to it. I wouldn't take out too many. Your buyer might walk away. I mean, the buyer naturally needs some, inspection time periods and things of that nature. Other than that, there's notices that could be given. So the difference between a notice and an addendum would be an addendum, just like a release, requires mutual consent. Imagine this scenario. You and I have agreed to buy and sell, and we have agreed to settle on July 5th. And what happens is I want to change that to July 7th. Am I allowed to do that on my own? No. Can't do it on my own. I need your consent as well, naturally, right? Because you would want to be part of that decision-making process. So if that's the case, I have to use an addendum. An addendum requires both parties' signatures, buyer, seller, landlord, tenant, whatever. Whereas a notice only needs one party's signature. So for example, if I'm the buyer and I want to buy your home, and I've added contingencies, which again, as a good buyer's agent, I would always have contingencies for my clients. So at that point, do I need your permission to release my own home inspection contingency? No, it's my home inspection contingency and I can release it if I want to. So at that point, I could just give you a notice saying that you acknowledge that my home inspection contingency has been removed. You'd never dispute that anyway. You'd be happy if I released my home inspection contingency or any of my contingencies, because that means I'm closing the door on myself. You'd be happy about that. Regardless, I don't need your permission. So that would be the difference between a notice. And pretty much all contracts are going to state the way notices must be delivered. So they're very, very specific on how, and sometimes you have to fill in the blank on how, like where you want it delivered. Do you want it fax, email, to your address, whatever. It doesn't really matter, but it has to be specifically written in. There's also other types of of notices. So the one that I just described is called an actual notice. But there's other types of notices as well, such as constructive notice. So for example, public records would be a perfect example of that. Let's just say that I buy a home from you and then I want to sue you later because of the square footage. Okay, I'm really angry. I didn't know the square footage was whatever it is. A judge could say to me, I'm really sorry. Again, remember, it's always up to a judge, but being that there is constructive notice given, in other words, public records, that's my opportunity to go and search the public records myself. And if I choose not to do that, my problem, not yours. You shouldn't be sued because of that. So constructive notice allows the public the opportunity and really gives them the responsibility to make sure that they're doing their due diligence on their own behalf and not relying on everybody else to do their inspections and things for them. So that would be considered constructive notice. But there's also inquiry notice, which is pretty big in my book. We've had lots of times where people want to buy property sight unseen, which is a little scary to me, to be honest with you. I don't like it at all, because how can you buy a home without even seeing it? Yeah, we do the video, the Skype, and walk them all around the property, which is pretty good, but at the same time, it just doesn't give you the feeling when you actually walk into the property. So imagine a scenario where a buyer buys a property sight unseen, and then they walk into the property after settlement and they notice there is a big leak in the ceiling. The judge would then say, well, that's your problem for not inspecting the property or going into the property because you were given inquiry notice. In other words, any normal person who walks in the home, it's an obvious thing that would naturally make you inquire more. So if I saw, just like you, if you see a stain on the ceiling, what's the first thing we would do? We're not going to ignore it. We're going to say, hey, agent, could you find out about this? Or, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, why is there a stain on the ceiling? What happened there? And maybe legitimately it was fixed. A lot of times we find that they fixed the leak but never repaired the cosmetics. That happens all the time. But other times it's because they didn't even repair it, but they left it obvious for you to see. Fair enough. As long as it's available, like nobody's hiding it, fraud, right? Then as long as they're naturally letting it be shown, it serves as inquiry notice. Does that relieve the agents with the responsibility of disclosing? No. You should still disclose anything that we're aware of. Again, check the where you are in the world and with your broker on that, but that's the way it works here. So, okay, property condition. Most contracts have something about property condition, such as it's got to be in the same condition as of home inspection date, or it has to be in the same condition as of contract date, or it has to be in the same condition of walkthrough day or settlement day, which is kind of scary. But regardless, the contract's always going to state what conditions should be that the house should be found. So from the day that you write the sales contract, you've done a visual inspection, you're happy with what you see. The buyer should not be expected to then take on the house after the seller has moved out and on the way out the door drug their heavy dresser all down the stairs and destroyed the hardwood floor. We've seen stuff like that. Some of it's not too bad. I mean, there has been a couple that have been pretty bad, but for the most part, that's not really normally a concern for us. It usually doesn't happen. But the contract does state that the property is supposed to be in the same condition. So if there's a big gaping hole in the wall, that's not really acceptable. That's not how we accepted the property. And the contract does say, again, what's the time frame written in? I don't know. You'd have to look at your own contract. Okay? So also prorations. This is an important part of a contract as well. Now, again, not all of these, like the acceleration clause, that's just a normal contract. It doesn't have anything to do with sales contract, but your prorations do. So, for example, if I buy a home on July 15th, I don't want to pay the full month's HOA. You don't want to pay the whole month's taxes. We shouldn't be expected to. So it's always prorated to the day that you purchase. So, a seller's responsible for the days they live there. Purchaser's responsible for the days they live there. So that's just how it works. And prorations are normal. There's also going to be pretty much in every good sales contract, you should have the risk of loss remains with who. And again, I can't imagine anyone putting anything other than the seller. Our sales contract says the seller, and I'm sure that yours does as well. So the risk of loss. What this means, guys, is while the property is under contract, it's still the seller's responsibility. So the seller should be keeping their homeowner's insurance. I always tell my sellers to keep it for a few days after settlement because there have been actual documented lawsuits that I personally know about, not with my clients, thank goodness, but that I'm aware of, that even after settlement, because the deed wasn't recorded, the seller was responsible for damage that happened the night of settlement. I mean, like, there's been several times where houses have burned to the ground. We had one, me personally, I had one that a tornado or some huge, like a hurricane or something huge, this was many, many years ago, but blew down the fence, knocked down a lot of things. And so the homeowner really naturally is responsible for that because it is what it is. They're responsible for the property until settlement, really. And that a judge could say, well, settlement really didn't occur till the deed was recorded. Money transferred. Each, judge might say something different. That's why I just tell my clients to keep their homeowner's insurance for a couple extra days. Now, survival merger, again, it depends on what your contract says, but the survival merger paragraph will either say, and I'll just tell you how it works. Normally, there's a reason why we do a walkthrough, and this is what I prepare my buyers for. The chances of you going back and suing the seller afterwards it's a very, very low chance that you'll win. So I want to not do that. Let's just do a walkthrough before settlement. And if there's something that the seller had promised to do, make them do it now. If they said they were going to paint the shutters, if they said they were going to repair the fence, if they said they were going to fix the dishwasher, it doesn't matter. If they said they were going to do it and they failed to do it, don't go to settlement or get some kind of agreement up front, maybe to hold money aside or something of that. Because most of the time, once you've gone to settlement, you've accepted the property, and that's what the walkthrough is for. So I would not the buyer typically cannot sue afterwards. So just be aware of that. We already did talk about time is of the essence, so that was a big deal. Now remember, with contracts, sometimes they're buyer and seller contracts, sometimes they're agency agreements. So in our module where we talk about agency agreements are personal service contracts. Personal service where I am going to help you buy a home. You're agreeing with me that I'm going to be your agent, and I'm agreeing that I will take you on as a client. So we have different sets of fiduciary duties to our clients versus our customers. And in some states, they don't call it fiduciary duties. They call it legislative duties. So just be aware of that. If you hear those words, they're pretty much interchangeable. They mean they're really the same thing. So agency agreements are also under contract law, except there's a few slight differences. For example, in a sales contract, buyer and seller, remember we talked about if a buyer dies, they still must buy. If a seller dies, still must sell. Well, it's a little different in a personal service because you're providing a personal service. And if I die, I can't show you homes as Casper the Ghost. However, watch out, because a lot of test questions will say the salesperson dies or the salesperson's license expires or something happens to the salesperson. Remember, your agency agreements are always between the broker and the client. And the broker under agency law is considered an agent. You, once you get your license, will be considered a sub-agent. So unless most of the test questions will actually say when the sub-agent dies or Sally salesperson, it doesn't matter. Remember, the agreements think, who is the parties on this agreement? Is it Sally salesperson? No. Is it Sally sub-agent? No. Is it Sally the agent or the broker? Then absolutely yes. So the questions will be very clear usually when it comes to that. And they're trying to trick you to make you think that if the salesperson, something happens to the salesperson, that the agreement is terminated. That's not the case. It's only if the agreement is terminated, with the broker, or the broker has died, or the client has died. I can't show you houses when you're dead, so we can't enforce those agreements because, first of all, if somebody dies, no performance was ever made. I mean, nobody performed because there's nothing we could do anymore. So agency agreements die at death. So just be aware of that. So listing agreements are a type of contract, but there's slight differences. Like I said, it's an agency contract versus a sales contract, and death does have a difference between those two. Some typical types of listing agreements are your open listing agreements, your exclusive. There's two different types of exclusive, and then there's your net listing agreements. Now be careful because some states say that net listing agreements are illegal. So if your state is one that bans net listing, you need to know that. And you need to be careful because the test question will focus a lot on the net listings because they want to make sure you know it's illegal. There are some states that still allow net listings, so you need to find out where you are and see if that's if it's allowed in your state. So your typical open listing agreement says, you're giving me written permission to market your property. However, I don't get paid unless I actually bring the buyer. So remember, if you and I enter into a listing agreement, the listing agreement, if it is an open agreement, means it's open to anyone. And I only get paid. The agent that brings the buyer in is the only one that gets paid. So I would only get paid if I brought in the buyer. So you could literally hire 20 listing agents if that was the case. Do agents typically practice this way? No, we don't at all, because we're putting a lot of time and energy and money into your listing, and we expect to be reimbursed for all of the marketing expenses that we've put into the home, and it wouldn't really be fair. Honestly, you would only be hurting yourself as a seller if you signed open listing agreements, because the agents really wouldn't put much time and energy in it. In fact, a majority of the time we spend our time marketing, but we're really most of the time marketing to other agents who have a pool of buyers. So we're doing everything we can to market to the other agents so that they can bring their buyer. And at the same time, we're searching for our own buyers. But chances are pretty high that it's going to be a cooperating broker that brings the buyer. We call them the selling brokers. And so they're going to actually sell the house. We're going to list it, market it, and introduce it to the world. and then the actual broker that has a buyer will bring the buyer there, and we cooperate. Not all agents in all areas cooperate. So again, you'll have to check the practice in your area. But as an exclusive agent, that would be something totally different. An exclusive agency agreement says you're only working with me as the agent. And no matter, again, I shouldn't say that, no matter what agent sells a property, whether it be me or whether it be another agent, we're still going to get reimbursed. We're going to get paid our commission because we need to be reimbursed for all of the marketing expenses and time and energy that we've put into marketing your home. But there is two different types of exclusive agencies agreements. So one is called an exclusive agency and one is called an exclusive right to sell. The exclusive right to sell says, I don't care, Mr. Seller, who sells this property. I've done a lot of marketing, put a lot of time and energy into it, and I'm going to get reimbursed. Whereas an exclusive agency agreement says, Mr. Seller, I don't care what agent sells your home, whether it be me or another agency. We're still getting paid. Unless you, Mr. Owner, Mrs. Owner, sell it on your own. If that's the case, you don't owe us a dime. So just to give you a quick story about the exclusive agency, imagine this scenario. You're going to invest money in a lockbox, in a sign, and your time entering into the cost also of your MLS, because you have to pay for that on a monthly basis. I mean, that's what we have to do in this area. We have to pay on a monthly basis for our MLS. I'm going to put signs up. I'm going to be doing open houses. I'm going to be doing lots of advertising on this property. And then someone drives along and sees my sign or saw my Craigslist ad or News Washington Post or whatever, and they knock on the door. Of course, the owner's going to say what? Come on in. I would love to show you my house. Oh, forget you, agent. I sold it on my own. So just remember that could be a situation that could happen at the same time. A lot of times real homeowners don't realize, but an exclusive agency, the other agents in the area, because you have to disclose that on your MLS. And if you're disclosing an exclusive agency, sometimes agents are a little nervous about bringing their buyer over there. They're afraid that you're going to try to steal them when they're not looking, or find their information or something. Because a lot of times the owners in exclusive agencies, the owners will always want to stick around and they always want to talk to the buyer. This is always the case, and agents know this. So sometimes they don't even want to show your property, and they try to, tell the buyer that they don't want to show it or that they can't work with them on this particular property. Hopefully they're not being unethical, but at the same time, I understand if that's your policy that you don't show exclusive agencies. Did the seller really help themselves? No, they didn't, but they don't realize this. So this is a big problem. Anyway, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, it does occur, and I just want you to be aware of it. So exclusive right to represent, exclusive agency, and open listings are what we've discussed. Open, you only get paid if you bring the buyer. Exclusive agency, you only get paid if the seller doesn't sell it. Exclusive right, you get paid no matter what. The last one I'm going to talk about right now is just is the net listing. So imagine this scenario. Now, remember, back in 1990, what do you think people did when they wanted to find out what their home was worth? Did they go to Zillow? Did they go to the internet at all? Absolutely no. I remember my first time using a computer was in 1995, believe it or not, and I got really good very quickly, but, I had a computer before that. I didn't know how to use it really. It was very difficult. Not very many people had a computer. It was very difficult. So most people went down to their local real estate agency and asked them, hey, I'd like to get some advice on what I would sell my home for. Or they'd call an appraiser. Again, how often was that on the to-do list, right? Today, people have access all the time. At any time, they can literally just go online and find out what their home is, the value could be. But again, it's easier now. But back then, people really didn't do that on a regular basis. The only time you cared about the value of your home is when you wanted to sell. It's the only time you cared. Other than that, you had no idea. That's why it's really funny, because this market drop historically has happened. It's just people didn't know about it because the information wasn't as commonly available or widely available. But it historically has always happened. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. So that's just how it works. So imagine the scenario. And by the way, when you got your license in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you were given a phone book and told to buy a pair of tennis shoes. Because that meant that you had to go knocking on doors and cold calling. That's what real estate agents did. So we're thankful nowadays we don't have to do that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still very effective. It's just there's lots of other ways to advertise as well and to get your information out there. So imagine you've got your pair of tennis shoes and you're walking the neighborhood and you want to tell, you knock on the door and there's this sweet little woman and she says, hey, I'm living on a fixed income. And you're like, well, I'm the local real estate agent. I really wanted to, see what we could do about selling your house is if you were interested. Yes, I'm on a fixed income. I really can't afford to buy a house. And then you look at her and you say, well, but do you own this house free and clear? Oh, yes, I've lived in it for 30 years. Really? Well, you might actually qualify to sell this house. And did you know homes in this area are selling for $100,000? And I can take you right down the street to the nice little elderly communities, active adult communities, whatever you want to call them, and help you buy a home for $30,000. Really? Wow. Yep, and you can live on the equity from your home. Does that sound like a great idea? I am on a fixed income. Yes, this could work out great for me. Okay, well listen, I'm the real estate agent, and I really like you, and I understand your situation, and I'm here to help. And truthfully, I don't want to charge you a commission because I want to make sure that you're capable of living for as long as you need to live on the income that you do have. So how about this? How about I put it on the market, and if I'm able to sell it for anything more, I'll just keep that as my commission. Does that sound like a fair deal? Oh, that's so sweet. You're such a nice person. I try. But then in the end, you know what happens, right? The real estate agent will list it on the market for significantly more and keep that amount. It's because people just didn't know the actual values. I mean, the one down the street was actually for sale for $200,000. I mean, these type of things have happened. And so in some states, it is illegal to do net listings. Other states are not illegal, but I would handle those with care, okay? Because you could get yourself in big trouble if you're not acting ethically with those. So again, remember with a net listing, you have no dollar amount or percentage or dollar per hour written in the agreement. It just says that if you're able to sell it for more than X dollars, that you'll collect that as your commission. So that's how you'll know a net listing, because it actually says there's no way for a seller to calculate how much you're going to make, and that's the big deal there. So that's your net listing. And those, again, are legal in some states. So remember your different types of listing agreements. And in our next video, we're going to talk about buyer-broker agreements and some other types of contracts that you need to know about. All right, thanks, guys.